Okay, so, yeah, this was probably, I guess, last recording you'll see of me. So I figured out I might as well, you know, do something insane for my last presentation. So this is a moderate defense of capitalism, or more so a case for, free markets, and trying to tell people that, the idea of capitalism, while it's something very, very easy to blame a lot of social problems and issues upon, I would say it is not quite the boogeyman that people make it out to be, right? So I'm going to be going through a couple of different points here. One is the usage of price as a proper method of distribution, the rewarding of innovation, misconceptions of capitalism fueling oppression and divisions upon identifying lines, and the idea that capitalism will, no matter what, become more unequal. And lastly, the idea that, capitalism is just fully unfettered capitalism, right? Capitalism, normally you could also use the same term capitalism to refer to a lot of Nordic countries, social democracies, and European democracies. Those are not socialist. So, point one is the usage of price as a proper method of distribution. Generally, of course, I'd say the largest case of this being proven would be the Soviet Union, where having many price controls, setting what price goods are at to make them affordable and whatnot, would instead kind of make it so that people did not know the actual value of goods, right? So through that, you would end up having it's all shown through this book called here. Let me just put the name here. It's in my notes. It's called The Turning Point: Revitalizing the Soviet Economy, written by two Soviet economists during that era. And they discuss a lot of cases where supermarkets or storage houses would have way too much of something or way too little of something. So you might have too much bread or something and too little fish, or vice versa, and so on in basically every single area of supply. Where having prices freely fluctuate instead, you would have, if something becomes really expensive, more is going to get produced, so the price is going to go down again, and so on. Of course, that doesn't really work if you have cartels or if the government intervenes to, protect corporations and stuff, which does often happen in the US, which is a great problem. And so point two is the rewarding of innovation. So, of course, through capitalism, it's, basically full meritocracy, which to many people would probably seem horrible because, if you're just going to only reward the people, of course, that work and, work really hard to try and make things for themselves, what about the lower people? What about homeless people and whatnot? How do you care for them? I would say, of course, personally, I would think you can still certainly have robust social services in a capitalist society. You can still tax people. You can still go through with redistribution of wealth. And that can all exist totally fine alongside capitalism. And I'd say it's, of course, functioned in Nordic countries, Denmark, all of that. But through rewarding of innovation, of course, a country is slowly, going to overall just do better in every single aspect. I personally, of course, would mention the differences, again, between the Soviet Union and the U.S. I would mention there was a thing known as the kitchen debate, where there was kind of a comparison with two presidents went there. I believe it was Reagan and Gorbachev, and they discussed, kitchen appliances in the Soviet Union and the U.S., which is pretty funny. But, of course, Gorbachev's defense of, the albeit inferior Soviet ones was that, they had better women's rights and stuff. Of course, the U.S. still had fairly similar ones, but while the U.S. sort of outmatched slightly in the innovation department there, I would say it's similar also in modern day too. You look at innovation across the world, it is, I'd say, for the most part, in capitalist countries, or at least countries that do still encourage innovation. I would call current China more something akin to late-stage capitalism, some weird, horrifying amalgamation, rather than actual communism. Another bit, which I think is a very major critique of capitalism very often, is it fueling sections of oppression, such as, racism, sexism. There's this idea that, of course, forced labor and stuff is unique to capitalism, which obviously it is not. I would mention, massive, again, huge case of forced labor, obviously the gulags and the Soviet Union. I would also mention, also, of course, current, with China being fairly authoritarian, they do have forced labor camps too for the Uyghurs. So there's that as well. But Of course, that's more a case, I would argue, of merely an authoritarian government or a more freedom, focused government that probably sounds like a bit insane because people sort of, mock American concepts of freedom often with the U.S., is very, of course, with their foreign policy, it's still abysmal. The U.S. still has many, 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 many problems. But I'd say, at least in terms of markets and stuff, I'd say a very significant case of capitalism with its idea of fueling oppression, I'd say it's actually the opposite, is capitalism focuses, of course, as, again, the idea of a meritocracy. It judges people based off of their capabilities, based off of their skills, based off of how much they can, fuel the economy, which seems horrible at first glance. But I personally would say that that is still far better than judging people based off of identifiers. I would say it is going to be better to judge women and people of different races based off of, how much they can contribute to society, rather than, the color of their skin or their gender, and so on. There's an example in South Africa, highly racist, abhorrent, just disgusting regime, probably, I would say, one of the worst cases of modern racism that's existed, where something sort of weird, a weird inconsistency here, is that regime absolutely encouraged white labor unions, right, to try and push black people out of the job market. And that's, government intervention, almost socialistic policy there, which is, fueling oppression. So it's, it's not just a consistent thing. Of course, I'd still also, of course, make the concession there, there can still be insanely authoritarian, horrible capitalistic regimes. I'd mention a lot of the regimes in South Africa, which were, again, fueled by the U.S., they're capitalistic and they're extremely oppressive. You could talk about, like, Pol Pot and whatnot. However, I would say that, you can have a regime that's trying to do good, be socialistic, generally still make horrible flaws and decrease human well-being. But I'd say that generally is almost universal for regimes that focus on equality above all else. However, you can have a regime that focuses upon free market and allowing free trade between people. And that can, of course, still be terrible, but I feel like it is generally a precursor to a proper functioning government and society. Like, you look at all of the, of course, all of the well-functioning societies today, ones that are relatively equal, which is going on to point 4, the idea that, capitalism will become, no matter what, more unequal over time, which I would say is, kind of just, well, it's pretty much disproven by facts at this point. Like, I mentioned the Gilded Age in the United States, around, I believe it was 1890, or 1920s too. Gilded Age, it was just an insane amount of wealth that was held by a very, very small amount of people, but a couple policies that were still within a capitalistic society managed to reduce that by an insane amount. So, clearly, through that, it does not necessarily need to become more and more unequal over time. And then, point 5, mentioning, idea of unfettered capitalism. Still not defending that. That is stupid, of course. I will acknowledge that. I don't support unfettered capitalism. I believe there do need to be some moderate restrictions, but I don't think there need to be full draconian socialistic, communistic restrictions, because, how I would personally put it currently is it's almost like a weird cursed version of conservatism, where you're wishing for something of the past that has been proven to fail over and over and over again. It may seem nice, but in practice it turns out it generally is not. So in conclusion, really my main point here is just, I would like people to diagnose issues in society more properly, rather than saying that everything is, a fault of our capitalistic economy or capitalistic system here. And that, a lot of it is far more complex than that. There are many social problems undergirding much of this. There are many other problems with administration, with people in positions of power doing fairly awful, horrible things. Some of it is capitalism. Yes, I 100% agree. There are a lot of horrible, I'd say, policies that the government goes through with, which just hurt people more than they help them. I would also add, I believe it was said by Jon Stewart. I imagine you know him, the late night host, where it was like, we have socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor in the U.S. right now, which of course, I utterly disagree with. So, yeah. that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening. Yeah, that's all.